Welcome back. I'm so glad to have Dr. Perry Francis here again to talk to us more about our mental health while we're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, we are going to take about the next 30 minutes to kind of talk a lot about family dynamics, because everything has sort of changed. Like we had said before in our last webinar, we're used to a certain schedule, and now the schedule is completely different. Most of us are doing some version of homeschooling. Our kids are with us all the time, and sometimes it's in tighter spaces if we have smaller apartments. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have larger houses, but no matter what, we still feel like we're on top of each other, and the dynamics of dealing with our children, it's just different. So I'm happy to have you here with your experience with family counseling, especially as a minister. You've had to counsel families quite a bit. So first of all, I think one of the things that I really wanted to kind of talk about, like everybody in the audience is going to have different age kids. So it's difficult because my kids are a little bit older. They're 11 and 14 and 16. So they have a little bit of a deeper understanding of what's happening versus somebody who has smaller kids. But, how do we explain this to our children? What's a safe way to explain to them, like, what's happening without overly stressing them out? Because I think some of the things we're going to talk about in the future, in some of the future questions that I have for you, has to deal with like being able to say no to them because things are happening, in the world and it's not safe for them. And so what's the appropriate way to sort of explain to them what's happening? With my kids, they kind of know. They read the news, they see the news, they know what's going on. So I guess maybe let's talk about younger kids first.
Sure. And we'll talk about both older and younger kids as we move through this. The first thing you should do, whether the kid is 6 or 16, is ask them what they know. You might learn something about your children and how much they're paying attention to what's going on around them and what they notice about you. Kids are sponges. They absorb everything around them. And when you think they're not looking or listening, they really are. So if the news is on and I'm a 6-year-old and I'm listening and I'm hearing this, I may not understand it, but at the very least I'm hearing things, and those are, getting into my memory, and to a certain extent might even be raising my anxiety as a little kid, trying to understand, especially if we're hearing about people who are dying and all of a sudden everything, our routine has changed. I don't get to see my friends. So ask them about what they know, because that may be the first step for you, is to dispel any catastrophic thoughts, any thoughts that aren't accurate, and give them accurate information. The second thing to remember is you talk to kids at their developmental level. You talk differently to a 6-year-old than you do to a 16-year-old. The 6-year-old is going to have a different cognitive understanding and a different way to process things that is much more concrete, much more black and white, versus someone who's 16. And albeit adolescents at 16, they're still thinking pretty concretely, but they have the ability to differentiate and to learn about what is appropriate news and what is, for want of a different term, fake news or exaggerated news. And to be able to explain things in a way that they'll understand. And this is especially true for people who don't work with kids on a regular basis, but maybe in the medical field, is that we're accustomed to using what we might call SAT vocabulary. And when you're dealing with somebody who's 6, 7, 8 years old, they don't have the same vocabulary emotionally or cognitively that we do. So trying to take it and not dumb it down, that's the wrong way of looking at it, is taking it down to the level at which they will understand it, using their terms and their words. Now, one way to explain this to kids, especially young kids, is to tell them that the world is playing a game of tag. Now, if you think about that, how did we play tag? Everybody ran around and you touched that person and that person was it, and then they ran and tried to touch the next person. Well, just like in the game of tag, the rules are you don't want to get tagged. You don't want somebody to touch you. So the best way to play this is to stay away from each other, and helping the kids understand that what we're doing, and they're going to ask about this, is, what if I get tagged? Well, if you get tagged, then we want to make special precautions to make sure you're okay. And, you know, you might get a bad cold. And we want to make sure that you're okay and that you don't tag somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So helping them understand it in a way that they can conceptualize it, that, you know, I don't want to get touched. And if I get touched, the game ends and I don't want to touch anybody else. Older kids are a lot more savvy, and it's best to listen to what they know and correct misinformation. You know, we get our news in many, many different ways now. 40 years ago, it was Walter Cronkite on CBS. And for those of you who don't know who Walter Cronkite is, look him up on Wikipedia. Today we got Facebook, TikTok, you know, all the different apps. You know, my generation, you have newspapers, you have news feeds. When I open up my phone, you know, I have New York Times news feed going across all the time. If you don't know something, you can find out about it. So sit down with your kids, find out where they're getting their information. And then if you don't know something, be able to say, you know, I don't know that. Let's look it up together. Mm-hmm. And help the kids, or they may end up helping you determine what is an appropriate website to gather information from. So think about it like this. How do we teach sex education? By giving them the information they want and not overburdening them with anything that they don't need at the age they're at. It's that old story when the 6-year-old came up to his daddy and said, "Where do babies come from?" And then the daddy went into a long 30-minute spiel about pregnancy, you know, getting somebody pregnant and, you know, the baby developing and then coming out and all of that. When the kid, you know, at the end, the kid was just looking glazed and said, "I just wanted to know which hospital." You know, and so it's not overwhelming them with information. And what you don't do, and this is important, is try and explain the worst case scenario. Instead, explain how you are going to do things that help keep everybody safe and healthy. There was a movie a couple of seasons ago called World War Z. Yeah. In fact, they interviewed the author of that on NPR. And he lectures at, you know, the Army medical schools and all these types of things because he's an expert in infectious diseases. And if you've ever watched that movie, you can see how easily the imagination of a pandemic can overwhelm somebody. And all you have to do is sit down and watch that movie and then think, boy, that's true. When in reality, no, it's not. Mm-hmm. That is fiction. And to be able to determine the difference between fiction and nonfiction and help the older kids learn how to do that, or quite frankly, have them teach us how to do it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good book too. I read that book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. So if our kids are starting to feel really anxious, you know, we talked about strategies to deal with our anxiety. I would assume it's fairly similar for kids, trying to exercise, get out, get some sun, any other sort of strategies that might help?
Well, let's put this in context, okay? Most young kids, and a lot of adults I know, they thrive on routine. Yes. They want to know little kids especially want to know that they're safe, their family is safe, and when can I see my friends? School is their job, it's their social functioning. Their routine, just like yours, has been totally turned upside down. It's been disrupted. And now they're seeing mom and dad at home more often than they've ever seen them. And they're seeing mom and dad stressed and worried. And it may not even be over COVID-19. It might be the fact that, gee, my business might go belly up, or I've got to figure out how to get this federal bailout money so I can, you know, continue to pay my workers or whatever. And so everything's discombobulated. And so it's time to create a new routine in the house. And so for people who have kids in the house, whether they be 16 or 6, a routine helps normalize things. We get up at the same time. We all brush our teeth. We do those normal things that we would do that as we would prepare to go out the door, except we're not going out the door, we're going on to our next chore. And to have that, especially for little kids, that routine on a big sheet of paper up on the refrigerator, otherwise known as the, the museum of the house where all the good paintings go. And so have that routine up there, at 7:30 we're doing this, at 8 o'clock we're doing that, and so forth. And help the kids collaborate with you to build that routine, to build in their learning, to build in their free time, to build in chores, and so forth. The other thing is to remember that boredom is not your enemy. And in fact, for kids, boredom can be beneficial because it can help them develop their imaginations outside of the iPad or their iPhone, outside of TV, and force them into doing things that they might not otherwise do that you could build into their routine, such as free time. No, this is not FaceTime with the iPad or the computer, but instead you get to go out in the backyard, you get and you have little lessons or something that they might do. You got to go find this or that. Now that'll work well with little kids. With the older kids, that's a whole nother story. They're going to look at you, roll their eyes, and say, "Really?" So that's where the collaborative part comes in, is building in, we need to have a certain routine throughout the day so that we know certain things are getting done, such as homework. Checking in with the teachers to see what you have to do, making sure that these things are completed. So one of the ways to conceptualize this is think of the acronym SIP, S-I-P, safety. How do I create a safe space? Now think about the last time you flew anywhere. The flight attendant did the safety speech and reminded everybody to put on their mask first before helping others. So if you think about that, and this is something I oftentimes use for clients who spend so much time taking care of everybody else and they don't take care of themselves, is what is said by that flight attendant. You have to put that mask on yourself before you can help others. So to help our children, you have to take care of yourself and manage your own anxiety. Because you need to remember, whether they're 16 or 6, you're playing for an audience. You're modeling what you want your children to do. So if you're going to be anxious and concerned and constantly on edge, they're going to pick up on that, and that's going to be very unsettling. So one way to create routine, to create safety is, so for example, if you have to go out of home and go to your office, you can model for them washing your hands and go through the YouTube video. Oh, I was horrible at washing my hands until I saw that YouTube video of the guy with the gloves on and the black ink. I don't know if you've seen that. Oh, it was marvelous. I spend 20 seconds now washing my hands singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or some other little something that ditty that. Well, when the kids see you do these things, they're aware of, mom and dad are practicing safe procedures. I'm going to practice safe procedures, and so you create that routine in the household. I stands for information. Regulate the media diet of your children. You don't need TV news on all the time playing in the background. There are some great YouTube videos that are they're actually humorous. They're quite funny about the whole C-19 crisis. And you can teach your children how to cope using these YouTube videos. So basically, we've got lots of, in my world in higher education, we've got lots of professors pulling out their guitars and singing the post-tenure blues or the I'm online and I don't want to be blues. So scouring YouTube or other sources for funny, humorous ways to connect with your kids about the information that they need so that it manages their anxiety, that is age appropriate and developmentally sound. And then P is problem solving. Work with your children on their own problem solving skills. Now think about that for a moment. What have they learned in school on how to get along with others or how to solve some sticky problem? All the teachers I know, especially with young kids, help develop social skills and problem-solving skills by not solving the problem for the child, but by helping the child solve the problem for themselves. So think about the last time you watched a little child do something, and your own child, and you were getting impatient, so you just did it for them.
Right.
So instead, when the child has a question about something, sit down and puzzle through the answer with them, teaching them how to solve problems that work. And then practice this with them throughout the day. When a child runs up against a frustration, rather than doing it for them, instead sit down, take a moment, both of you practice, and this is the routine. Let's stop, take a moment, let's take a deep breath. Let's do that 5 times. Deep breath in, deep breath out, deep breath in, and do that 5 times. Now, tell me what the problem is. And then let the child explain it to you and say, gee, can we solve this together? What have you tried already? Let's think about, doing this. Now, that takes time out of your day.
Yeah.
But it's time well spent with a child who, when they do go back to school, and they will go back to school, will be practicing these problem-solving skills that they would be practicing every day at school anyway. But for the older kids, one of the issues that you want to work through is the same thing with them, is trying to practice those problem-solving skills, which for them are more sophisticated. And for the older kids to have better, more flexible boundaries on how they might do something, a way that you might want them to do it, but if it works for them and it doesn't hurt them, and in fact might teach them something new, well, go ahead and let them do that. Mm-hmm. Our world is not the be-all and end-all world. Our kids are changing and growing up just like we did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and just like you did in the the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But they're now faced with different things that we weren't faced with. I wasn't faced with a pandemic. I was faced with nuclear destruction. So how did we deal with that? How did our parents deal with that? By giving us appropriate information, giving us flexible boundaries on how to solve that, and to be there when they fall down, to dust them off, pick them up, and let them try again. So having that type of control, that type of structure and routine helps children manage anxiety, but it also helps them learn on their own how to deal with the information that's coming in.
Oh, that's awesome, because there's actually a little bit of conflicting information out there when it comes to like setting up routines and stuff, where some people posting on Facebook just saying, that increases their anxiety, and everybody's an expert on everything, right? Now we're all infectious disease specialists. Before we were all constitutional scholars, and so I didn't really know my kids are a little bit older, so they can kind of set schedules. But I think with my son, I was, sharing earlier that I discovered that after two weeks of online school that he had just opted out of doing any of his homework. He just figured he was never going to get caught not doing it. And I think that setting a routine for him was probably really important. Where some people are just saying, don't schedule things because it's too much for them. They're already dealing with so much, and that's not the proper way to homeschool. And, so as a mom who knows nothing about any of this, I kind of looked at that and it was just kind of like, well, I don't know what's the right answer at the chalkboard with all of the times, set up, or, don't give them more anxiety by setting up a schedule. But I like the scheduling, the free time too. And I'm finding that even with my older child, because the only playmates that she has right now are her siblings, that she is a little more flexible when it comes to playing. They were creating obstacle courses in the backyard yesterday, and they were all playing and having fun and different challenges in and out of the pool, and run around and kick the soccer ball here, and let's see who does it the fastest. So even though she's probably more sophisticated than that, she still seemed to be enjoying herself. So I was like, whatever. So with families,
let me address something, because you mentioned something that's really important, because we, don't give them a schedule, do give them a schedule.
Yeah.
Here's the issue that comes up with that, is that what you're hearing are two different sides of the same coin, which is how do we help our kids manage their lives and we manage our own lives. To set up a rigid schedule and follow it no matter what creates anxiety. to give no schedule and no information does the same. And instead, it's that place in the middle where we have an appropriate schedule that we collaborate to come together with, and to be flexible enough to know that when the kids are out in the backyard playing and they're just being kids, you don't have to follow the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Too often we think in dichotomous ways, and we need to be much more sophisticated than that. It's not an either or, it's a both and.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of our families out there are going to get a lot out of that, because I'm sure there are a lot of moms out there who have kind of seen the same thing going, I don't know what the right answer is here. Apparently I had the wrong answer for my son.
Well, and it's important because different kids have different needs. You talk about your son and how he is in the world. And as a mom, you're very attuned to that. But you also talk about your two daughters and how they are in the world, and you're very attuned to that. To try and come up with one schedule that fits all three of those kids, that would be impossible.
Yeah.
But to have the flexibility to tailor that and then to be flexible with it would be very helpful. And realize that nobody is ever going to follow the schedule perfectly, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm finding here, and we had talked about it in the previous webinar, is, that we're all kind of together more often than we've ever been before. We're in smaller, more confined spaces, although we do need to make sure to get outside. And sometimes we end up being a little bit short with each other. And with my husband and myself, if I kind of snap at him on something, like, he understands what's going on and kind of blows it off. If I snap at my kids, they don't quite understand all the stresses. And sometimes I feel bad because I'll come back to them, 10 minutes later and say, I'm really sorry I snapped at you. You have to understand I'm under a lot of stress. We're trying to deal with the business. We're trying to deal with our, supporting our employees and all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, I don't want to overwhelm them. And they're older, so they understand, but I don't want to overwhelm them with the financial anxiety that maybe we're having, because some of that is there. So, we're all human. We all screw up. I do apologize, but how else can I explain that I'm sort of on edge, or do I just apologize and, say it wasn't appropriate for me to snap at you?
Well, first, the thing that we have to do for all of us is give ourselves a bit of grace. No one has ever taught us to handle this unique situation. No one ever said that the world was going to have a pandemic that came out of Wuhan, China, that we all of a sudden would, cover the world, and we'd all be trying to figure out the best way to get a hold of gloves and N95 masks and all the rest of that. So realize that, stay-at-home orders and being self-quarantined or shelter in place, that just sounds scary. We're all learning how to fly here. So we're all in the same boat. So a family meeting about that would be probably beneficial, is that, hey, sometimes we're all going to be a little bit short with one another, but we're all going to love one another, and we're going to be safe. Just because somebody yells at you doesn't mean that they don't love you. And making sure that everybody is on board with that. Next, be mindful of your own anxiety. If you feel like you're getting anxious, that's the time to give yourself a break. So snapping is minimized as much as possible. So if you're in the middle of trying to fix dinner and your 6-year-old comes running in and wants your attention at that moment, and you're doing your best to redirect him or her to the other parent, and it's just not working, and you feel your anxiety begin to rise, that's your cue to go ahead and turn everything off on the stove for a minute, even if it makes dinner just a little bit mushy. But that's okay. And take a moment for yourself, take a deep breath, and do that 5 times or so. And then manage what's going on. Your kids are watching you and are very much aware of your anxiety already, because they're the ones on the receiving end of the snapping. Also remember that children know how to get your attention. They live with you. They know all your buttons. And this is that funny thing that every parent has said to me when I'm working with families. is my kids behave so much better over at the neighbor's house. Well, the reason that is they're on their best behavior because you've taught them how to act. But when they come home, the rules change. And the reason they change is because you're in a different relationship with them than they are over at the neighbors. And they know your buttons, and when you change the buttons, they learn just as fast what those buttons are changed to, and then try and figure out ways to get your attention. So it's like that old statement we used to say to kids in middle school, you know, if somebody's teasing you, just ignore them. Mm-hmm. That was lousy advice. Because what happens is the middle school kid that's bullying you just increases the pressure.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to ignore what's going on, again, lean into the anxiety a little bit, know that the anxiety is going to be there. Identify the ways that you can tolerate that and begin practicing that on a regular basis. So as you begin to see your anxiety rise, give yourself that 5 or 10 minutes, sit down with that child, simply explain, you know, let's go find dad or let's go find mom and let them help you. And I'll go back to cooking so that we can make sure that you're safe and I'm safe, or, you know, that you're taken care of and I can get dinner on the table and all. And if you do snap, and you've said it yourself, if you do snap, it is okay to apologize and to explain that your day has been disrupted too. And that's the key. You know, my day's been disrupted just like yours has. And boy, that just makes us all a bit crazy, doesn't it? And I would leave it at that to a certain extent, especially for young kids, to try and explain to them that, you know, you're worried about this or worried about that, only increases their anxiety.
Right.
And you know, you feel small when the kid comes in with their piggy bank and says, here, take this money and hope it helps the business. When instead the message you want to say is, you know, we're trying to figure out new ways to do things. And sometimes that's hard, but that's okay because we've done hard things before and we can do it together as a family. Mm-hmm. So part of what that means, though, is being mindful. And that's being aware of what's going on for you. So if you realize that you're standing in front of the stove and you're, you know, cooking away and you're whipping the eggs and you realize that you beat the hell out of the eggs because you're not thinking about whipping the eggs, you're instead going through your own mind all the different things that are going on at work and everything else, that's not being mindful. What that is being distracted.
Yeah.
And so if you can refocus yourself to some of the tasks in front of you, it helps you manage what's going on. And that's the hard part in a time like this, is you find yourself so disrupted and so worried about things that you can't focus. So one good trick is to set aside time to worry. So I'm going to fix dinner from 5 to 6. During 5 to 6, I'm focused on dinner. I'm focused on creating, or, you know, from 5 to 6, I'm going to be drawing or whatever it is. And then I'm going to worry from 6 to 7. That's the time I'm going to set aside to think about my business and move through those particular things and set aside that to do that and let the family know, hey, I need from 6 to 7 to go deal with this particular thing so that you aren't snapping at each other. So part of being mindful is being aware of yourself so that as your families do spend more time together, that you're more aware of being with the family rather than with the business while you're hanging out with the family.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure. Well, and you kind of answered my questions of strategies we can use to make sure we don't drive each other crazy day to day. Do you have any other strategies to kind of, besides just physical distance?
You know, one thing is, and we talked a little bit about this before, is it's okay for kids to be bored.
Yeah.
You know, it's helping kids stop and wonder about what's going on. So when you're scheduled so much that you have no time to sort of to stop and wonder, then we don't develop that natural curiosity. So if your child is fascinated by an anthill, for example, and asking questions, stop and be curious with the child. I know in Arizona, I grew up in Phoenix, is that we have those great anthills with the great big ants, and to begin to sit there and just watch what's going on, and to be fascinated with the child. The other thing is to nurture mindfulness with the child, to help them get in touch with their breathing and teach them how to calm themselves down. So talk about, being aware of your breath with a child. As young as 3 and 4, they learn those skills, and to sit down and practice that diaphragmatic breathing. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Reset learned helplessness. So if you don't think children can ever do nothing, if they're just sitting there kind of waiting, then they've learned helplessness. In other words, they've learned that mommy and daddy are going to keep us busy. So, we'd give some directive. So one great tactic is to have a box of crafts or scrap materials and point it to the kids who are at the loss and say, there you go, have at it. And let them do, well, what do you want us to do with it? Whatever you want to do with it, as long as you don't hurt yourself, hurt others, or destroy the house. Play is very important. And one of the things that you can do as a family, and Amazon still delivers,
Thank God.
is to get out board games. We are so accustomed now to playing apps, and an app is a singular focus between you and that screen. To sit down as a family and play any sort of game, whether it be younger kids, Candyland, or the Game of Life, or Shoots and Ladders, I forget what the other one is. There's an Apple one.
Apples to Apples. There's Apples to Apples Kids. Yeah, Sorry.
Sorry, all those great games. Yeah. And get the younger kid or the older kids. Now, a great game to play now is called Pandemic. Believe it or not, look it up. There's a game called Pandemic. And the reason why I recommend it, it is not a competition game. It is a game where you have to work together to prevent a pandemic in the world.
Oh, there you go.
And so rather than you're competing with each other, you're learning to work cooperatively with each other. One thing that we don't often do, and in my generation we'd get out the old photo albums and go through the photo albums. You'd be surprised how many kids get fascinated by those pictures. Well, you can do the same thing today. It's just called the iPad.
Yeah.
And you just start flipping through some of these old pictures, or get out the baby book, or get out the, those types of things that help tell stories about your family, and make that space once a week or so to have the children tell you their favorite story about something. It's always fascinating. You have 3 kids, I have 2 kids. When we all get together, and I know this because you're the oldest of 3, it's fascinating to watch my nieces and nephews, or my own kids, tell their impression of one incident, and have one kid say, "No, that's not how it happened."
Yeah.
And then the other kids say, "Well, no, I remember it this way," and to share some of those stories. It's those types of things that help curb that boredom.
Yeah, my kids, because I have an 8th grader, you were supposed to look through all of the old pictures and kind of share, because we were going to do a slideshow of their whole life. So they were all very excited to see which pictures of Kate I was going to pick, and asking for, when I was telling funny stories about Grace in Ann Arbor, especially, she likes looking at all of her old pictures in Ann Arbor, and they want to hear, well, what about when I was that age and stuff. So you're right. They really do enjoy looking at those. And yeah, because it's just not a physical book anymore. We still have all those photos saved online.
No, I don't have COVID-19. I have allergies.
That's what everybody says. Or my kids just learned, they didn't realize that it wasn't love at first sight with mom and dad. So they really thought that was hilarious. And they really enjoyed actually hearing the story of how that relationship evolved. So that was really cute, especially my 16-year-old. I was surprised that she was so interested.
It's always fascinating to know how mom and dad met.
Yeah. So, how can we use this time to build our relationships with our spouse? I had one friend who said, "Oh my gosh, like by the end of this, I'm going to be divorced." And then I hear other people who say, there's going to be a lot of COVID babies out there. What can we do to use this time to kind of help to build that relationship to make it stronger?
I'm always fascinated by that question because we're already doing some of this. It's just our jobs are getting in the way of it. Think about what you already do to stay connected to your spouse. You have a date night. You have, a special time. I think probably one of the best things, and this is both for the spouse and just as a family, is turn the TV off when you're having dinner. It's fascinating to look at the research that says that families who eat together and do so without distractions have a stronger bond with one another. And the reason that is because they're sharing their day. So if you can set aside time to have a date night, whether it be, once a week or whatever it was prior to this, even if it means, telling the kids, you guys all get to stay inside and do something. Mom and dad are going to go outside on the back porch and just talk. Why this is important is because right now, especially people with kids, are being overwhelmed by all this time they're spending with their kids. And they need to realize that they don't have to spend all that time with their kids. Letting the kids self-manage, as long as they don't destroy the house or destroy each other, that's okay. They can be bored. And when they come up to you and say, "I'm bored," well, that's okay. You can be bored. There's the backyard, there are magazines, there's this. Go figure out, which one. There are plenty of books in the house. Go read. And the kids get in the way of that me time. That couple time. So once the kids are in bed, oftentimes, the husband and wife, or the wife and wife, or the husband and husband, the couple feels just exhausted. So planning, whether it's 6 in the morning or planning something at 7 o'clock at night, once or twice a week, or 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever time the kids go to bed, or, if you have older kids that are taking care of themselves, is to spend specific time with your spouse. The other thing to do, quite frankly, is, you just go back to it, is plan to do something together as husband and wife, not with the kids. Not that, not necessarily a date night, but is there a common project that the two of you could work on together that you've always put off? Is there a garden to be built? Is there a room to be painted, or whatever it is that supports your marriage? The other thing you can do that, quite frankly, is going to sound counterintuitive, is to realize that you don't have to spend every waking moment with your spouse. Again, it's that old analogy, you have to put the mask on yourself before you put it on somebody else, is to be able to say, "I need some me time," and have your spouse protect that me time for you, and then do the same for the spouse, so that when you do come together, you come together with a bit more energy and less anxiety that gets in the way of being together. This isn't really rocket science in that sense. It's more about being intentional and mindful of what you need to do. Now is not the time to air out old grievances or to talk about those things that are already stressful, because you're stressed enough. And if you can compartmentalize that, in that, what I mean by that is spend time getting to know that person again, and spending quality time with them, and then setting aside that other time when, "Hey, listen, here's something I'd like to talk to you about." Separate those two things so that you are nourishing your relationship, and at the same time, in a separate area, you're managing your relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, now's not the time to start major fights when you can't escape from each other at all.
Exactly.
And so do you have any advice when it comes to deepening relationships with the kids, also, besides, making sure to be intentional when you are spending time with them? which I think is important. I think we are, no matter what, even beyond the pandemic, we're always distracted.
Well, and that's that other thing is that if you have multiple kids, then spending quality time one at a time with those kids. You know, we often find, we have to do things as a family. Well, no, you don't. You can take one child and have that be their hour with dad to go to McDonald's if you're still, or wherever it is that you go for takeout food, and just spend time sitting in the car, eating a burger and having a shake with mom and dad, even if it's just a half hour, so that they get that me time with mom or dad without the interference of the other kids. That's important quality time, even if you don't talk about much. To be present, to model being non-anxious, to find out what's going on in their lives, who do they miss, and try not to solve the problem as much as you listen to what's going on. I spend a lot of time teaching people empathy. Empathy, in my opinion, is something that we develop over time, both naturally, but also when it's modeled for us by teachers and parents and siblings and friends and neighbors. And so when your child tells you something that's sad, is to say, gee, that really sounds like that's sad. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to hear that. And not try and solve it.
Yeah. I think moms are better at that than dads.
We're socialized differently, yeah.
Yeah.
In the broad sense, men are taught to fix things and women are taught to relate to things. That's in a broad sense. Now,
yes.
My father's generation and his father's generation were much worse at that. They always had to fix something, didn't have that type of empathy. And your husband has probably been taught a bit more empathy just by societies in and of itself. But to have that time where we can listen to the child, not fix it unless we're asked to, and then rather than fix it, help them problem solve it. How would you like to solve this problem? What are some of the things that you can see that might work, and what are some of the things where that might get interfered with? And to teach them appropriate problem solving skills where you're involved with them, helping them, rather than fixing it for them, which then they only learn helplessness.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a big complaint about certain generations with the helicopter parents that, now they can't solve anything from themselves and they have a hard time guiding themselves. A few issues with that in former employees. Mm-hmm. So learning, that could be a different webinar altogether.
Oh yeah.
Yes, that would be lovely. I'm sure a lot of orthodontists would love to hear about that. So this is happening kind of frequently with us with the older kids, having teenagers getting requests to go see friends, go to parties. I just heard about a party that happened yesterday with a few of the local high schools. And parents are letting their kids go to these gatherings and stuff, which, for me, it's not going to happen. And my daughter doesn't really do those things, so it isn't a big deal, but two of her closest friends wanted to go hike Camelback Mountain, and I said no, but I felt horrible about it because she hasn't seen any of her friends in so long. And I just, you don't want to be mean because it's not an unreasonable request to go hike, for a couple of hours, but Camelback Mountain especially is extremely crowded right now. And to go up Camelback Mountain, you actually have to hold on to this gigantic pole that every other person has touched. And I explained that to her, look, we can't do this. But I have some friends who are telling me that because all of these parties are getting posted on Instagram and such, that they're getting a lot of pushback from their kids. So do you have any advice besides the fact that, life sucks and I'm mean and I'm okay with that? Because I'm okay being the bad guy. I really am. I did feel bad when I told her no for the hiking, but she did understand, when I kind of explained it to her.
And that's your child, and every child's going to react a little bit differently to types of things. First, realize that teenagers, they have developed the gas pedal in the brain and the brake pedal in the brain. They know that. It's just that, and this is actually part of just biological development, is that they know how to do the gas, and emotionally, they're invincible.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is look at the Florida shores the last couple of weeks to know that college students who you think should know better and actually know they don't are going to go down there thinking they're invincible and go hang out. And what were they saying? Well, it affects young people differently. We survive it like it's a bad cold.
Yeah.
Which is quite sobering when several young people have died recently. And they didn't have underlying conditions that we knew about. So first, we need to reframe something. Parents aren't being mean. Parents are doing their job. It's different when you cast yourself as the villain and you feel bad about having to do it than casting yourself as the parent providing appropriate boundaries for the children. That's about you being a good parent, not about you being the ogre mommy, as my wife used to call herself. The second thing is realize that teenagers are social animals. Middle school and high school, they're holding on to you with one hand and holding on to their friends with the other, and they're trying to balance those two worlds. And as nice and wonderful as your family is and all your friends and colleagues' families are, they're not nearly as exciting as a bunch of 16-year-olds hanging out on Camelback Mountain talking trash about one another. Because we're just not in that crowd with them. So understanding that that's going on, and to realize that that's not a battle you're going to win, but you have to choose whether or not you want to die on that hill. When it comes down to the safety of a child, to make sure that they're safe, I'm willing to be very clear about that boundary and say, I get it, and you want to be with your friends. I really do. Oh no, you don't. You were never 16. Well, yeah, I was. But being empathic to that, and at the same time saying, but my job as your parent is to make sure that you're safe. Now, that's going to go over like a bitter pill.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you providing the guidance and the care is something that your child will see. And they may tell you you're mean, and they may tell you you're an ogre, and it's okay to say, well, I appreciate that, and I know you're mad at me, and I love you anyway, and I will continue to love you, and my job as your parent is to make sure that you're safe. And they'll, like I said earlier, they know your buttons, they know how to try and make you feel guilty, and to invite that and to say, I know you're angry at me. I'm sorry that this has come to this, but at the same time, I need to help you feel. I need to know that you're safe.
Yeah.
Those are hard things. There really is no magic bullet here other than being an appropriate parent with flexible boundaries that allow for thoughtful consideration of what is safe and what is not safe. The other thing is, you need to ask yourself as a parent, and you can ask the same of your child, is, if you were going out to the desert to have a beer party, I would react the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Realize that this isn't about whether or not I mean, it's about what is appropriate for you to do in an environment that isn't safe right now. And that's hard to do because you're going to get backlash no matter what you do.
Yeah, it's a no-win.
It's a no-win scenario. So the other piece is, it's more about you getting comfortable with your role as a parent, knowing that you're a parent and not the best friend.
Yes. So my one last question, and we talked about this a little bit, setting up schedules and stuff, is like, now we're all homeschoolers, and you're an educator, even though you educate the older teens and young adults. It's hard for us balancing being like a part-time teacher and being the parent at the same time, even though most of our teachers are still working really hard at being the teachers, which I appreciate. Any perspective on helping parents kind of tackle this new role? Because it's a little overwhelming for all of us right now.
I would say it's not a little overwhelming, it's a lot overwhelming.
Okay.
I work in the College of Education at Eastern Michigan University that has one of the top teacher education programs in the United States. Our students take upwards of 130 to 140 credit hours in both, in general education and then in teacher education. They spend an entire semester student teaching, and that's just the pinnacle of their experience. Before all that takes place, they spend semester after semester, going into classrooms, observing, teaching lessons, and so forth, preparing to become teachers. And now we have a bunch of parents who are now being asked to become teachers themselves and thinking, well, I know my kid, I should be able to do this perfectly. It doesn't work that way. You were taught to be a dentist and then an orthodontist. Nowhere in there were you taught to be a teacher. The best thing I can recommend in those particular situations is, again, give yourself a little bit of slack, or in fact, give yourself a lot of slack, and then depend upon resources that are readily available anywhere online to talk about what are some of the best tips or best practices when you're doing things at home. The other thing is realize that you need to know what you don't know. If you don't know how to do algebra, that's okay. You weren't supposed to know that. You're supposed to help facilitate that learning and help the child identify places with him or her on how to pick that knowledge up. The other thing, and we've all heard it, I can't do this. And to respond with, yeah, I know it's really tough right now, but let's work together on this and try and figure out how to do it, because I want to learn something. Mm. So real quick, first, give yourself a little bit of grace. You weren't trained to do this. Find resources where you can. Realize that your kids are your kids, not your students. And you're going to have a different expectation of them that teachers have. Teachers carry with them a certain weight of authority. When I walk into a classroom, I've been told, one of my graduate assistants said, Dr. Francis, some of the times the graduate students are afraid of you. I said, well, really, why? I'm a pussycat. You know that. She said, well, I work with you all the time. She said, when you walk into the classroom, you take command of the classroom. Mm. And I have that presence as a professor and the clinic manager that I can do that. When I come into my home, and this happened to me in Texas, and my daughter was having a bit of a meltdown, and I was trying to practice some of the skills that I teach others, and she looks at me and goes, "Don't try that psychological stuff on me."
I never ever saying that.
Never, no. Because my child knows me as dad and not the counselor.
Yeah.
So your kids look at you as mom and dad and not the teacher, because the teacher carries with them, a certain amount of authority and knowledge. So there's no easy way to do this other than preparation, reviewing with your child what the lessons are, and then helping them self-manage those lessons. And think about this for a moment. If you were nagging your kids to do their homework before this happened, what makes you think that that's going to change now that they're homeschooled?
Yeah, yeah.
So setting reasonable expectations for yourself as to what you can manage and what you can do. The other piece is, if you have access to your students' teachers, use that access. Call them, talk to them, ask them what things should we be are the most important for us to cover and what things aren't. And ask them for advice on how do you motivate my son that's different than how I motivate them. Teachers are craving to be able to help their students right now. They aren't at home with their feet up on their desk laughing because they get to be paid being home. They're at home working on lessons that they have to then transmit via the internet for the kids to do. and calling that teacher and saying, how best can I help my student learn this information? Is there anything that I need to know that would be helpful in motivating them or helping them pick this information up? Would go a long way in helping you become a better homeschooler, and a great way to let the teacher know that you're involved and want to be involved.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, because like when we see that the teachers have emailed us and kind of like, these are my sort of office hours, and you know, the kids can email me at any time, you know, it never really occurred to me that I could email them at any time to ask them questions about things. Either if they email me like, your son hasn't turned in his homework, then obviously I email back. But you know, if I had a question about something in particular, like I guess it just wouldn't occur to me first to reach out to those teachers. And they're doing a great job of making themselves accessible at both my daughter's public high school and my little kid's private school. They're all making themselves accessible, but I guess I needed to hear that. I bet a lot of other parents need to hear that too. Like, they're accessible to you as a parent as well. And I love Khan Academy. I think it's a fantastic website, and it's got great videos to explain, especially math, which is lovely.
You know, the other thing that people seem to forget is parents who homeschool have been doing this with their kids for the most of the time since they were going to school.
Yeah.
And so they've developed that relationship with their child. And now all of a sudden, come, you know, March, whatever it was in the state of Arizona or whatever state this is broadcast to, your kids have been forced out of school. They've been told to bring home their books and told to learn on their own. And by the way, mom and dad are going to help you. And you're having to balance the fact that you're trying to, you know, manage your business or figure out how to pay the rent or, you know, all these different things. And at the same time, you've been thrown into the role of becoming a homeschooling teacher. Realize that everybody is now, you know, 50 yards back behind the scrimmage line because nobody prepared us to do this.
Yeah.
And so feeling as if you're anxious about this is appropriate. You're supposed to feel, I'd worry if you weren't feeling anxious about it. It's how you manage that anxiety and how you marshal the resources that you may not know that you have to manage that anxiety and to help your child move forward in their education.
Awesome. Well, with that, I know you have someplace to be in about 10 minutes, maybe out on the back patio. I would love to thank my uncle, Dr. Perry Francis, for joining us for these last 2 webinars. They've been extremely helpful for me. I know they're going to be extremely helpful for the parents of our done orthodontic patients, of the members of all my online forums, and just anybody really, because I think our mental health is so important right now. And all of these tips when it comes to parenting and family are just very, very valued. So I can thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And
right.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored that you did that.
Oh, well, I may bother you again.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night.